Coming to you live from the studios of KMUD, this is Heroes and Patriots. Today is Thursday, November 2nd, 2023, and we are very glad that you all have tuned in for this program. I'm Mary Massey with co-host John Sakowitz. Hey, John.
Hey, good morning, Mary, and good morning to listeners here of the broadcast in Northern California, and to those listening to the live web stream throughout the country and throughout the world, particularly in Palestine, in Gaza, and in Israel.
Today's program will be archived at kmud.org should you want to listen to it again, and our program website, heroespatriots.org, plus social media. As she mentioned, Dorothy Schaefer is our engineer this morning, and I want to remind listeners that they can call in with a question on topic. The number to call, 707-923-3911. Our first guest is Richard Silverstein. He is the publisher of TIKKUM, founded in 2003. TIKKUM is the foremost blog addressing Israeli national security issues. It regularly reports and documents subject to Israel military censorship. It regularly publishes reports and documents subject to Israeli military censorship or judicial gag orders. In 2009, the New York Times featured Mr. Silverstein, his reporting on its front page about the top secret transcripts of FBI wiretaps on the Israeli embassy, exposing an influence campaign advocating an attack on Iran. With the war in Ukraine continuing and the additional conflict between Israel and Hamas, we want to talk about all the things that have been happening really for the last 2 years, but most specifically since October 7th. Welcome to the program, Richard.
Thank you. That's good to
Hi,
be
Richard. Just a quick note to our listeners. Richard and I are high school classmates. For those of you out there who are about to say, oh, you guys are self-hating Jews, I think we went to the same temple Beth Shalom in New City. And I also want to remind listeners that if you Google my name up, you'll see that I am a direct descendant of Kazimierz Sakowicz, Kazmierz Sakowicz, who was the first journalist to report on the mass murder of Jews, and that was in the Lithuanian-Polish border in 1942. He was later hunted down by the Nazis in Operation Tempest, and he was assassinated by the Nazis. So for those who would paint us with the anti-Semite brush, I would tell them, you're full of baloney.
and with that, Richard, weigh in or react to it, the first event happening on October 7th with the bombing, and then today's New York Times reporting there are 9,000 people already killed in Gaza. So let's start at the beginning. Could you react to what happened, and what do you think about that from your perspective and your writings?
It's important to deal with the context of this rather than just dealing with Hamas's attack on Israelis, which is what's getting the most play and the most horror in the reaction of people in the world, the United States and elsewhere. The fact is that Israel had been killing Palestinians at a huge rate all through 2023. And every day, the Israeli army invaded Palestinian towns. This mostly was on the West Bank. And it killed 1 or 2 or 3 Palestinians each night. And then settlers came to Palestinian villages and basically burned them down. They killed Palestinians with impunity. Often the army joined with the settlers, so there was no law enforcement at all, because the army and the settlers are basically one, and they act on behalf of the state. So the Palestinians were desperate, I think, and they felt like they had nothing to lose. And they mounted this very complex operation, land, sea, and air. and they broke through the fence, and they invaded southern Israel, and that's 1,400 Israelis who were killed. And almost immediately following that, Israel launched reprisal and counterattacks. And then within the last week or so, the ground forces have started to enter Gaza, and that's now when the killing fields have really started. So even though 1,400 Israelis were killed by Hamas, and that certainly is a horrible thing, but 9,000 Palestinians have died. And always when there's a war or when there's fighting between Israel and the Palestinians, the toll for the Palestinians is many times higher than the aid. So the way I look at it is I believe in proportionality. So if 6 times or 10 times the number of Palestinians are killed than Israelis, then to me, that means that the problem is with the Israelis killing the Palestinians, and less so with the with Palestinians killing Israelis.
Richard, let's talk about that breaking news as of this morning. The 9,000 civilians killed in Gaza. That's a UN estimate. Right before we went on air, I mean, literally right before we went on air, 5 minutes before we went on air, I had a guy here in Mendocino County who I greatly respect. He ran for supervisor on the coast in Fort Bragg. Email me telling me that I should be wary of my estimates. I should be wary of my numbers. I mean, drill down to how we get real news out of Gaza right now. There's so much false news. There's so much disinformation. There's so much spinning. Of course, I'll leave it at that. How do we get real news?
Well, generally, Hamas does not engage in disinformation. If anything, the Israelis are much more prone to do that. There were claims that babies were beheaded and that there were rapes, and all sorts of sort of grotesque claims were made about Hamas when they invaded southern Israel, and they turned out not to be true. And the thing about the death toll that the Gaza Ministry of Health provides is they document every single person, their name, the age, and the date of the death. And so there was a 206-page list, and this was when there were 6,700 dead. And so when people say, it's like the U.S. officials said, oh, I don't believe the numbers that they're given because the health ministry is a tool of Hamas. Well, the fact of the matter is you can't make up the names of dead people. They're right out there for everyone to see. And if they want to doubt it, I'd like them to show us the specific names that are wrong. So I think that the numbers that are being given are totally legitimate. And there's a history in past invasions by Israel of the same casualty figures being actually accurate. So we have a history of them being accurate, and that I think is still holds true.
Richard, we're going to get to the meat of our show in a second. I had the honor and the privilege of speaking to Elie Wiesel's son, Elijah, recently, and he asked a lot of hard questions that Jews are asking themselves about Palestinians. But before we get to that list of questions, I want to hear your thoughts about how do we achieve a ceasefire in Palestine right now, in Gaza, if that's even possible, and will this war spread to Iran? Is the real war a proxy war between the superpowers, the United States and Iran, and Israel, with China right behind Iran? So, first question is about the ceasefire, and second question is about will this war escalate?
Well, in terms of the ceasefire, there's only one way in which there can be a ceasefire. If Biden gets cojones and decides that he's going to go to the Israelis and he's going to force them to a ceasefire. He's unwilling to do that, and his spokespeople have said that it only will help Hamas, when actually it will help the Palestinians themselves because they will no longer be killed. And it's a brutal, cold, heartless U.S. policy towards the Palestinians. And so the Israelis will never engage in a ceasefire. And in the past, when Israel has invaded Gaza, the only way in which the wars have ended is when the U.S. came to Israel and said, enough, we've had enough. And so far, Biden's unwilling to do that. And that's really a heinous crime in terms of our foreign policy, that we haven't been willing to put our foot down. Now going to another, your second important question, and that is about the spread of the war. As you mentioned, Israel has enemies in Lebanon in the north, Hezbollah, and it has Iran as one of its arch enemies. And in south of Israel, you have the Houthis in Yemen, who are allies of the Iranians. And you have Iranian militias in Iraq, and they all have drones and they all have missiles. And the Houthis have already fired missiles at Israel, which have been intercepted. Hezbollah is fighting against Israel on the northern border. So I think it's unlikely that this could spread, but the problem is that any mistake that any party makes here could send us into a catastrophic spiral leading to a regional war.
It's 12 minutes past the hour, 9:12 on the West Coast, 12:12 on the East Coast. We are listening to Heroes and Patriots, and we are speaking with Richard Silverstein about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. If you would like to call in with a question on topic, 707-923-3911, we'd appreciate that. Richard, you had mentioned that in the past, this is sort of a cycle, if you will, that Israelis are killing Palestinians, there are wars, etc. If bombing doesn't work and killing doesn't work, what's going to work?
Well, the problem here is not terrorism. Terrorism is a symptom. The problem is a political one, and the denial of rights, political rights to the Palestinian people. So if you're not willing to give the Palestinians political rights, then there's going to be terrorism. There's going to be people killed on both sides. And that's the horrible, horrible calculus here of this conflict, which is that Israel has been facilitated by all of its Western allies, especially the United States. And we validate their rejectionism and their refusal to offer anything to the Palestinians, any real political power or rights. And so the Israelis are basically entitled to do whatever they want.
We have a phone call. Let's take that now, and then we can continue on. Caller, if you're listening, go ahead with your question.
Hi, good morning. This is John Redding. I'm the gentleman that asked about the Hamas sources. There are a couple things said that strike me as being inaccurate. The first was the characterization of Hamas on October 7th as an invasion, which it clearly was not. It was a terrorist act, and they murdered civilians in the most horrible of ways. Also, I'm confused by the statement that Palestinians are being denied their political rights. They elected Hamas, and they've been a self-governing entity. And finally, it is said that the numbers coming out of Gaza are reliable, but I keep thinking about the reporting of a hospital being bombed and more than 500 people died, and it turned out not to be true. So I can't understand why we have such different facts at our disposal.
Thank you, John. Let's let Richard weigh in.
Well, I don't think the issue is facts. I think the issue is opinions. And I think obviously Hamas invaded southern Israel. They crossed the border and not the border, but they broke through the fence and they attacked Israel. And then Israel retaliated and invaded Gaza. The thing about Hamas is that I'm not validating Hamas. I'm not saying that I support Hamas, but the Palestinians have no other political entity that represents them. The Palestinian Authority is corrupt and useless, and it's basically a front for the Israelis. And Hamas is the only Palestinian entity that resists Israeli aggression and Israeli genocide. So, and I want to bring up something else that's not related to what the gentleman said. I think we really need to be talking about the issue of genocide, and I know what your second guest is going to be talking about today. 20 years ago, people didn't want to call Israel an apartheid state, and now that's accepted as what Israel is. And now, in the last few years, people are upset about the idea of calling Israel a genocidal state. And this invasion of Gaza proves this without any question, that Israel is engaged in genocide. And my problem is that the world is normalizing genocide. In World War II, when the Nazis went on a rampage through Europe and they engaged in genocide against the Jews, the Allied powers, organized and they fought against the Nazis and they eventually defeated them. And there was a revulsion at the genocide that the Nazis perpetrated. Now, the Israelis get away with murder, literally. And no one, except for Palestinian solidarity groups and left-wing human rights groups, those are the only ones that are really speaking out about this. You have a couple of voices in Israel, but mostly Israelis are cowed. And even the supporters of the Palestinians in the West, in the United States, they lose their jobs. They're charged with crimes, and there's a huge amount of suppression of legitimate debate and discussion about the Palestinian conflict.
Well, I was going to ask you about the reaction from folks in the West. Some of the demonstrations. But before I ask that, we do have another call. So, caller, if you're listening, go ahead with your question.
I had a question that followed up an earlier one by Mary, actually, about what else could happen. And I've been reading from some of the people promoting peace within Israel and within Palestine that there's a very active civil society movement in both countries. Forget about the West right now. What about, what can be done to support those civil society movements to end this perpetual war?
Thank you, caller.
And what are you hearing? I'm just curious what Richard's hearing on that front that may not be getting the publicity that it deserves to bring about a perspective that peace is possible. Not peace, perhaps, but civil society could help bring about a resolution and maybe even change in government and Israel and leading to a two-state possibility.
Richard?
The issue here is that the Israeli government, which came to power about 6 months ago, was the most right-wing government ever in the history of the country. It's a brutal, cold-hearted government. It's a misogynist government. It's a theocratic government, fundamentalist government, and it's a genocidal government, as I mentioned. So there is a civil society infrastructure in Israel, and there are human rights groups that are both calling for human rights within Israel itself and for the Palestinians. And of course, it's very important to support them. But the problem is there really is not any long-term ability or hope that they can do any major structural changes in Israel. I'd say 20 or 30 years ago, I was doing something similar to this in terms of my knowledge about and my commitment to Israel-Palestine. I would have been more hopeful because there were groups and they did resonate inside of Israeli society. But now we have basically a fascist state. And when a state is a fascist state, they can repress any speech that they want. And so it's very limited what the civil society groups can do in Israel, unfortunately.
Yeah. What I was going to ask before we had the second caller was the reaction in the States, the anti-Semitism that's going on here in the United States. I'm not sure. I think in France as well. Could you speak to that, and also the Arab community? What's happening to them?
Well, we had a terrible incident in Chicago about 2 weeks ago where a landlord crashed into one of his tenants' apartments, and he stabbed a 6-year-old boy like 20 times and killed the boy. And so that's the crazy people in the world who have their ideas about what's going on, and they want to take revenge on the Palestinians. And there's a whole white supremacist movement in the U.S. which is anti-Semitic and also anti-Muslim. So, and the one thing I want to say about anti-Semitism is that Israel, this is a little controversial, but it's true. Israel, by its actions, by its brutality, by its genocide, is creating hatred of Jews outside of Israel. And that's one of the reasons, not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons, because there are Muslims, there are people in the world who blame Jews, all Jews, for the crimes that Israel is committing. So it's less safe in Israel than it is outside of Israel, because Jews live in danger in Israel. But Israel is making it dangerous for Jews outside of Israel as well.
Wow, interesting perspective. You know, John, you served, you did several UN peacekeeping missions, and I wonder if you could weigh in on your perspective from this, and you might tell folks where those were.
Yeah, as former military and as former law enforcement here in California, I was privileged to serve as one of the Blue Helmets in UN peacekeeping missions in Bosnia, Syria, and others. A total of 8 missions. And you know, I have to credit the United Nations at this point for objective reporting about what's going on right now. And I look forward, in fact, even at 71 years old, I would join a peacekeeping mission. And I look forward to their intervention. In speaking with Israeli friends, including Elie Wiesel's son, Elisha, you have to wonder where peacekeepers stand. So the first thing a peacekeeper would ask in this situation is, what is the stated goal of Hamas? What is the stated goal of Hamas? When they mean from the river to the sea, what do they mean? So I'm a peacekeeper. I'm wearing the blue helmet. I'm probably a battalion commander. I've got a couple of hundred or even 1,000 blue helmets under my command. And I'm trying to protect civilians at this point. And I'm trying to figure out what the stated goal of Hamas is, how to keep them, the civilian population, free from violence, free from war crimes. What am I protecting? What does the population mean from the river to the sea? And what is the stated goal of Hamas, Richard?
Well, the stated goal, Hamas has 2 different ways of looking at that. The first way is what it would prefer, what it wants. And what it would like is a single democratic state in all of Israel and Palestine, in which Jews and Palestinians would have equal rights. And the phrase used is a state for all its citizens, because Israel right now is a state for only Jews. There are Israeli Palestinian citizens of Israel, but they are suffering the same kind of violation and racism that blacks did in the Jim Crow South. So Hamas would like a solution which is one state for both Jews and Palestinians, and that's what it would prefer. it is willing to settle for a solution where it would coexist, the Palestinians would coexist with Israel, and they've called it a hudna, or a ceasefire, a long-term, multi-decade ceasefire with Israel. But there has to be political rights, John. What is Hamas looking for? Political rights, not economic rights, which is what Israel and the United States are trying to foist on the Palestinians. The economic situation is bad enough, but they need political rights, and Israel is not willing to give political rights, and that's really the crux of the problem here, and why there can't be peace.
It's a good answer. One quick question, and then we want you to promote your site and your blog. Again, putting myself in the role of a battalion commander for a UN peacekeeping force, Israel would argue that after Israel unilaterally withdrew from Gaza in 2005, there was a bloodbath. Again, my job is to protect civilians. What would you say? How would you answer that concern?
Well, the problem was that Israel basically withdrew from Gaza, but didn't negotiate anything with Hamas. They just left and they abandoned Gaza. And if you're going to make a political move in a situation where two entities are at war with each other, there has to be some negotiation about what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen. So the Israelis basically just abandoned Gaza. And that's why the situation developed as it did.
Thank you. Richard, we have to say goodbye. We have Professor Francis Boyle on the line. And please plug your site and how we could support your great work.
Thank you, John and Mary. So my blog is TIKKUM OLUM, and the URL is richardsilverstein.com. And I write for a couple of publications, The New Arab, Middle East Eye, and Jacobin Magazine. So I want to thank you for having me, and much appreciated.
Shalom.
Thank you so much, Richard. And it's 28 minutes past the hour. This is Heroes and Patriots on KMUD. And we are going to begin our conversations with Dr. Francis Boyle, who is an American human rights lawyer and professor of international law at the University of Illinois College of Law. He has served as counsel for Bosnia and Herzegovina and supported the rights of Palestinians and indigenous peoples. Dr. Boyle is an expert on the application of the Genocide Convention and the legal procedures at the World Court. Dr. Boyle, welcome to the program.
Well, nice to see you again, Mary and John. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, you're truly one of our favorite guests. I don't say that to every guest, believe me. You really are one of the world's top experts in international law and in prosecuting war crimes at the World Court. So I'll start off with the obvious question. We have a UN official who just resigned, calling Israel's attack genocide. When will we see that kind of justice meted out? When will war criminals be held accountable? What will it take?
Well, let me say this. I've been working on it for quite some time, and I did bring to justice the Yugoslav president Slobodan Milosevic. I did convince the prosecutor for the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, Carla De Ponte, to indict him for almost every crime in the ICTY statute, including 2 counts of genocide, one for genocide in Bosnia in general, and the second, genocide at Srebrenica. At that time, my clients were the mothers of Srebrenica and Pedrina, the women who survived that massacre, and he died on trial in The Hague after he had made a motion to dismiss all charges. The tribunal considered the motion, issued a judgment, and denied his motion, and they were proceeding to the defense case. So it can be done, but it took me a while. I first went after Milosevic in the World Court in 1993. So when you have massive violations of human rights by anyone, U.S. government officials, British, Israelis, Russians, it takes time to bring these people to justice.
You know, before we turn to Israel, this seems to apply to the Ukrainians, with Russia attacking them unprovoked. Do you see it that way? Do you see this as a genocidal act by the Russians?
Well, as of now, Ukraine has not alleged genocide at the World Court against Russia. They did file a lawsuit, but the whole basis of the lawsuit was not genocide, but rather the allegations of genocide that Russia had made against them. But right now, I see war crimes and crimes against humanity. I don't really see genocide so far. Russia did inflict outright genocide against the Chechens. I was their lawyer for a period of time and did sue the Russian Federation at the International Court of Justice for genocide. I regret to report that one I didn't get too far.
Right. John?
Well, yeah, just hearing Milosevic's name invoked again just sends chills down my spine. He was a beast. Back to the whole procedural issue of holding a nation accountable for war crimes. You write, you ask the question, when will a nation invoke the Genocide Convention? Was it the 1947 Genocide Convention? What do you mean by that, Professor?
Right, 1948 Genocide Convention.
1948.
I have tried very hard over the years to get a Muslim or Arab state to give me the authority to sue Israel at the International Court of Justice for genocide and get an emergency hearing and a temporary restraining order that would then go to the Security Council for enforcement. So far, I haven't succeeded. I've tried in other contexts. I knew full well the massacre Srebrenica was coming because of my involvement there in the Balkans. I must have contacted 5 different Muslim or Arab states to try to get authority to stop it at the World Court. I failed. And 7,000 to 8,000 Bosnian Muslim men and boys were exterminated. So it's very difficult to get a state willing to act on behalf of citizens who are not its own. Now, there is one example recently on the case of the Rohingya in Myanmar, where the Rohingya are Muslims. The government of Myanmar purports to be Buddhist. I don't think they really follow the teachings of Buddha, at least that I've studied. But in any event, the Islamic Conference Organization met and decided to delegate their chair, Gambia, to sue the Myanmar for genocide on the Rohingya, and that lawsuit was filed, yes. So that's the first time something like that has been done.
Why the reluctance of an Arab state to invoke the convention, the War Crimes Convention? You would think it would be a natural thing for them to do.
You would think so too, John. I don't know what to say. I've tried this repeatedly for the Bosnians and the Palestinians, and I'm not going to go through the states I've contacted, but they're basically Arab and Muslim states, and so far I haven't gotten authority. So
let's follow this up from another angle. Recently, I read that Sarah Lee Whitson from the Democracy for an Arab World Now, Dawn, recently wrote that it's a grotesque hoax, in quotes, a grotesque hoax, that the Biden administration is not just greenlighting Israeli ethnic cleansing, but it's bankrolling it.
That's correct. And
yeah.
it's not, to put it into a legal perspective, the United States government is a party to the Genocide Convention.
That's where I was going with this. Yeah.
Article 3E makes it a crime to engage in complicity in genocide.
Right.
And clearly the Biden administration is complicitous in Israeli genocide against the Palestinians. Right. I've also offered to sue the United States government for aiding and abetting genocide here. But again, so far I don't have any takers. In the case of the Bosnians, I did recommend to President Izetbegovic that he give me authority to sue Britain for aiding and abetting the Yugoslav genocide against the Bosnians, which he did do. And I started those proceedings. They did not come to fruition because the British threatened the Bosnians if I actually filed the lawsuit. But at that time, I was in negotiations with the World Court for a hearing.
Wow.
Yeah, it's again, I'm left wondering what it's going to take for a country withstanding to invoke these articles. Just and not even talking about genocide, but just talking about deportation or relocation. Article 8 of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court includes a clause on the deportation or forcible transfer of a population as a war crime. Article 25 of the same statute defines individual criminal complicity and states that a person shall be criminally responsible and liable for punishment when that crime has occurred within the jurisdiction of the court, if that person aids and abets or otherwise assists in its commission or attempted commission, including providing the means for that commission. Seems to me that crime of war crime of deportation has long preceded the ethnic cleansing. And again, we're talking about a crime that's been 25 years or longer in the making. Again, no takers. Why?
Well, first of all, your legal analysis is correct. Indeed, the state of Palestine is a party to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. So all these crimes being inflicted by Israel are subject to the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. But they aren't going to do diddly squat to help the Palestinians because if you look at what the sociology of what the International Criminal Court has done, they haven't indicted one American, one Brit, one European, one Israeli. I recommended to President Abbas after Operation Cast Lead that Palestine accept the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, which they did. They filed a complaint. They haven't done anything. Zip, zero, nothing. I filed a complaint against Bush and the rest of them for extraordinary rendition that was under investigation by the previous ICC prosecutor, Bensouda from Gambia. This new ICC prosecutor came in, guess where? From Britain, and he terminated that investigation. So the ICC is highly political. They're not, they went lickety split after Putin, but nothing against Israel, nothing against Bush Jr., nothing against Tony Blair. Forget it. They're nothing against the NATO states for their destruction of Libya. The bombing of Libya campaign there killed 50,000. But let me just make a few additional points which I think are important here. In the Nuremberg Charter, 1945, that was the idea of President Franklin Roosevelt, a lawyer, by the way, to prosecute the major Nazi war criminals. Article 6, paragraph B, defines a Nuremberg war crime in part as, quote, wanton destruction of cities, towns, or villages, unquote. Wanton destruction of cities, towns, or villages, unquote. Well, that's what's been going on by Israel in Gaza since October 8th. Wanton destruction of all of Gaza. Over now, 9,000 people are dead. To compare this to Bosnia, in the Bosnian case, the International Court of Justice ruled in its final decision on the merits that the extermination of 7,000 at Bosnia was enough to constitute genocide.
Right.
But we've already exceeded that. And then, as I told you, the ICTY prosecutor, Carla Del Ponte, I convinced her to indict Milosevic for the massacre at Srebrenica, 7,000. So we're above that now already.
Right.
Yes.
We have a call in for you, Dr. Boyle. Caller, if you're listening, go ahead with your question.
Thank you. Professor Boyle, I wanted to, first I want to say I appreciate everything that you've done over the decades, really, to bring the issue of genocide to the fore and to the courts. But I wanted to ask you just about the Arab state issue, if you think that the reason might be that they are concerned about opening up a Pandora's box of this. Look at the Houthis. Look at the intrastate genocide in Syria. Look at the position of the Kurds. And this has been decades in the making, too, equally, perhaps even more damaging than what the Houthis, the Yemen situation is eliminating an entire population of a country, so practically. So I just wonder if there needs to be some kind of extra regional perspective on this, and the entire region is, and possibly because of colonialism, suffering from that original sin. And so I'm just wondering if that's the reason why you're not getting more taking up of your request.
Thank you, caller.
Well, that's a very good question. My experience, having done a lot of work in the Arab and Muslim world, most of these Arab leaders are rotten, corrupt, and in the pockets of the United States and Western imperialism. The leaders, I'm not talking about the people, I'm talking about the leaders, are rotten and corrupt. They couldn't care less about the Palestinians. You saw Prince Bosaw all set to sell out the Palestinians to join the Abraham Accords. You saw 4 other Muslim states sell out the Palestinians at the drop of a hat. So that is a very serious problem. It's not just opening up a can of worms, but the bottom line is they couldn't care less about the Palestinians. They've done nothing effective to help them that I can see.
Mm-hmm. John?
The Palestinians really are standing on their own. Now, I do know in the past 2 days, the Houthi leadership has tried to come to their defense, but most of these other Arab states not. Indeed, when they have these emergency meetings of the Arab League in Cairo, you have to understand this is all just public relations by these leaders. They don't intend to do anything to help the Palestinians, but they all come together in Cairo and they make these fancy speeches and they appear before the news media for their people at home to make it think they're actually doing something when they know they aren't.
Right.
Professor Boyle, again, putting myself in the position of a battalion commander in a UN peacekeeping force, I have to see both sides. I have to weigh both sides. I have to be objective. And one of the questions I would ask myself is something that came up in our interview with Mr. Silverstein, who immediately preceded you. And that is this whole story of false news of Israel's report that 200 babies were decapitated. And where I'm going with this is, did Israel exaggerate the Hamas atrocities to facilitate its own war crimes? What's your take on that?
Well, John, I've been involved in wars ever since I came here in one capacity or another. And there's always propaganda in wars. It's very difficult to figure out precisely what is going on. What can I say? I spent I get up this morning, I got up at 5:30, and I've been reading ever since reports, dispatches from all over the world to try to figure out what's going on. That's sort of my normal work schedule. Only in the afternoon do I actually sit down and do some research and writing. So I spent hours just trying to objectively figure out what's going on. But let me make one point. Israel has claimed a right of self-defense. And the Biden administration has supported this. We hear constantly, Israel's right of self-defense. And the Europeans have said that, the French, the British, the Germans, others, the Dutch. Well, that's baloney. This matter was considered by the International Court of Justice in its proceedings on Israel's wall, where Israel tried to justify the wall by arguing its right of self-defense to build the wall and under Article 51 of the UN Charter. And the court rejected this and said Article 51 and the right of self-defense has nothing at all to do with this situation. Israel is the belligerent occupant of the West Bank. That's it. It's subject to the 4 Geneva Conventions of 1949, the Hague Regulations of 1907, and 3 different human rights treaties. And Article 51 and the right of self-defense have nothing at all to do with this.
Yeah, it's you're exactly right on all points. Mr. Silverstein mentioned that there, and I've seen this. I've actually seen this with my own eyes. The 9,000 names of the civilians who were killed in Gaza. That is something that cannot be fabricated. That is something that cannot be manufactured. An investigator going backwards could investigate. Once you have the identities of the victims, can investigate and verify each one of those casualties. And it's been my experience that Israel's IDF has an internal propaganda machine, and it generates so much propaganda that Hamas, painting Hamas as sadistic, savage, subhuman, these 200 babies that were beheaded and violated, desecrated, that these claims can't be verified. There are no names. There are no specifics. If you want to tell a lie, you tell it in generalities. If you want to tell the truth, as you know, being a law professor, you're specific because the specifics can be verified. Why isn't it why doesn't the IDF propaganda machine get exposed for what it really is?
Yeah.
Well, you raise a good point. Back in 1986, I spent 2 weeks traveling all up and down occupied Palestine, including Gaza. And at the end, I went to meet with the highest level military official on the West Bank to complain. And I said, I spent 2 weeks here, and you are committing Nuremberg crimes against the Palestinian people. What is your defense? And he said, military necessity. And I said, well, that defense was made by the lawyers for the Nazis at Nuremberg, and it was rejected. What's your response to that? And he said, we have public relations people in the United States who take care of these matters for us. In other words, he conceded my point. Now, let me continue. Then I went to the office of the legal advisor to the foreign ministry, former ambassador Robbie Sable, who knows who I am. Same dialogue. And at the end of it, he said, we have public relations people in the United States who take care of this matter for us. Then I went to the Ministry of Justice, a fellow named Justice Weiner, who was their top person on the occupied Palestinian territories. Same dialogue. And he said, we have public relations people in the United States who take care of this matter for us.
Wow.
So this was 1986. So They didn't deny to me that they were committing Nuremberg crimes against the Palestinians. It's all a matter of public relations here in the United States. And they made it clear they couldn't care less about Europe or Britain, the Muslim world, the Arab world. All they care about is public relations here in the United States. And if you look at all of the mainstream news media, which I flip through at night, and the mainstream publications, it's all from the Zionist perspective. Zionist control, domination, commentators, anchors, etc. And that's what is really going on here.
How do we turn that around?
Yeah, and who funds it? Who's behind it? Name some names.
Well, just look at who owns these stations and who are the anchors and who are the commentators. It's money and power and influence and fear that, you know, if you get up and criticize Israel, you're targeted. Look what's going on, and professors and others who are criticizing Israel.
Yeah. Look what's going on with the Squad. I mean, you know, they want to formally censure them. You want to talk about that for a second? Just how courageous the Squad has been, and what your relationship is with the members of the Squad.
Well, not just the Squad, but I entered Harvard in September 1971 as an ardent supporter of the Palestinians, back in the days when they were treated as lepers, both nationally, internationally, and especially at Harvard. And Harvard still treats them as lepers. 2 years ago, they effected a constructive discharge on the prominent African-American professor intellectual Cornel West, now running for president. So nothing's changed at Harvard. But starting those days, Zionists have accused me of being everything but a child molester and have treated me accordingly. It's no joke, honest.
Wow.
It's no joke. They tried, the moment I began to look for a job as a law professor, I graduated Harvard Law School as June 1976. I began to look for a job in Labor Day weekend 1976. Zionists did everything humanly possible to sabotage me, to prevent me to become a law professor. Even when I got a tenure-track slot, the senior Jewish professor on this faculty, friends of the dean, on the committee, was campaigning against me getting tenure. I've been blackballed and blacklisted and censored all out of the entire American legal profession because of my support for the Palestinians. And even here on campus, the University of Illinois' own WILL TV and radio station will not have me on for anything, because the Jewish community have told them that if Boyle is ever on there for anything, we will withhold all our contributions to.
Wow.
Same thing happened to me at the Chicago Tribune. In honor of the 20th anniversary of the Six-Day War, they asked me to write an op-ed piece, which I did, saying we needed a two-state solution. And the only way we could have that is negotiations between the PLO and Israel. The Jewish community told the Tribune if ever I were in there again, they would withhold all advertising. That's the way it works.
We have one more caller, and caller, if you're listening, make it very quick. We only have about 3 or 4 minutes. Go ahead with your question.
Hi, I thought that was a good question with the previous guest. What news source what reliable and influential news sources can we go to?
Okay, well, so that's your question?
Right. Okay. I would say right now, to get the Palestinian, all the U.S. news media presents Israeli Hasbara propaganda, every one of them. So they're completely worthless, although I have to follow them. Okay. To get the Palestinian side, you can go online and see Iranian Press TV. They are pretty good in presenting the Palestinian point of view. As for Al Jazeera, not really. Al Jazeera is pretty much the Arabic BBC or BBC Arabic. So you get the BBC perspective. Actually, the BBC used to interview me on Palestine, and then Tony Blair came in and made his so-called reforms, and I never heard from them again.
Wow.
So BBC is not reliable either. But to get the unvarnished Palestinian side, I go to Iranian Press TV. I'll have a look at what Al Jazeera said, but just the other night they had a Zionist on there trashing what the Palestinian position.
Yeah, it's interesting that that your progressive voice is out of Urbana, Illinois. It's not on one of the coastal, bi-coastal campuses like Harvard, Yale, Princeton on the East Coast, or Stanford or UC Berkeley here on the West Coast. You're out of Urbana, Illinois. And the other progressive voice that we follow closely is John Quigley, who is professor emeritus of international law at Ohio State. Again, in the
Midwest.
in the Midwest, and we're going to have him on the show soon. He's famously stated the other day, Palestinians in Gaza do have some place to go, and that place is Israel. Their homes are in Israel. The leading voices for peace and the leading progressive voices are in the Midwest. Why don't you close the show with that observation, Professor Boyle? What is it going to take to really get real academic freedom and real truth telling? Because that is the only thing that will lead to the kind of justice that you and Professor John Quigley seek.
Well, John and I are friends. He was ahead of me at Harvard Law School. What can I say? The Zionists here in America destroy people who try to be professors in all fields that criticize Israel. Not just me. They've tried to do that regularly. The Jewish professors at Harvard Law School vetoed my appointment to the faculty because of my position on the Palestinians. But many others, ADL and APAC, maintain enemies lists of academics who have criticized Israel. And if you get on that list, they will try to destroy your academic career. It's that simple.
Well, I'm sorry you're on.
And they will especially do this to Jewish professors. Indeed, Jewish professors are treated worse than the rest of us. I'm treated as an enemy, but Jewish professors are treated as traitors.
Traitors, right.
Well, that is our show, Dr. Boyle, and we deeply appreciate you sticking your neck out there and keeping at it. And I always learn so much from you, and it's upsetting, but do continue the fight.
People like you and Richard and John Quigley are the reasons we do the show. John Quigley are the reasons we do the show, Francis.
You are.
I want you to know that.
Well, thanks for having us.